can't quite see.
Hello.
Hi. There. Thank you, Yacha, for bringing this about. And we, yeah, that's great. Happy birthday. Your birthday Wednesday, right? Next week. Welcome. Yeah, that's great. Whatever happened just before you got here, can you hear back in the back okay?
Mm-hmm.
Whatever happened on your way here and since you arrived and your entire life prior is absolutely gone. Absolutely gone. And that can be scary, take a person's breath away, but it's true. And it can also be incredibly liberating to be able to just see that this right now is all that's real. Truly, which means it's possible to be utterly unburdened. Imagine. The only impression that we can ever have that something of the past is still here is when we think about it. But in actual reality, if we couldn't think about the past, and if we couldn't allow it to express itself in the things we identify with and our conditioning and unresolved issues and pain that we never really let ourselves feel, if we didn't have any remnant of any of that in our minds, we would be free of it. Which is to say, not that seeing that makes it suddenly disappear, but it's to see that there's a difference between what the mind carries and tells us is real and true. The difference between that and the immediate, actual, present moment reality. And sometimes even just seeing that difference is so freeing. So why don't we just sit in silence for a few minutes? Just feel that you're here, just physically here. Don't think about it, feel it. Feel how you have a tendency to hold yourself. You don't have to do that. Let the air hold you. Let the seat hold you. You can rest. Just rest. There's a presence in you that's never suffered. It's never been lonely. It's never aspired to anything. Feel the space around your body and the space inside your body. Let yourself relax into the space that's all around you. is just a sound, like the motorcycle sound. We try so hard. There's so much exertion all our lives to try to feel okay. Try to bring about things that will make us content and maybe even happy, at least secure. And something in us deeply knows none of it will ever do it in an absolutely reliable way. We know that. But mostly we do it anyway because we don't know what else to do. But there's always that ill-at-ease underlying knowing that it's thin and that nothing is for keeps. The space that is inside each of us is the only thing that's real. But it feels like there's nothing there. So to turn from the usual suspects of wishing for love, wishing for good physical health, financial well-being, good job, beauty, youth, all that. All those things that seem tangible, we mostly can't help ourselves from going after them and believing that if we can just get things lined up right, then there'll be joy and fulfillment. And meanwhile, the whole time we're exerting this terrible effort that we deeply know is never going to do it. There's something attending us through the whole drama. That's what we deeply are. That doesn't need anything. It's just here. But we don't notice it because we're so busy believing that we are who we appear to be, which is the person making all those efforts. Meanwhile, we already are the thing we long for, the thing that we think all those things will get us. It's already here. And somewhere in us we know this. If only in the form of that we deeply know something's out of whack. We're trying to talk ourselves into believing that the circumstantial things are ultimately gonna do it. So even if all we have is that kind of queasy, niggling doubt, that's an indication that we know better. Now, you may say you know this. It gets said a lot that you've already got what you want. You already are it. But of course, if you don't feel that, if you don't sense it in your viscera in an ongoing kind of way, then what do but try to go after it? And you're trying to go after something that you are. And so time comes into the picture. I say, well, I feel discontent, I feel unconscious, I feel not very evolved. So I'm going to figure out what I need to do to get that way. That's what we do, because we don't know what else to do. And that whole thing is a terrible setup for not being in the present, which is the only place, if it's a place, that we can ever sense what we are. It's not just a pretty thing that people say, that you already are it. That's not just language. It's a perception problem that we don't know it. What we do, though, because we don't necessarily experience the reality of it, is we think we can't bear to just sit with the absence of the longed for thing, experientially, the absence. So we say, I have to work on myself. I have to have a certain practice. I have to let go of one thing and another. And often in the effort to do that, we tend to experience ordinary life as the problem, as if ordinary life is in the way. It's inconvenient if we are busy or in stressful circumstances or don't have time to sit quietly once a day. And because something in the mind says it's out there somewhere in the future, we neglect this. And this is not just the longed for thing, it's actual life as it's delivered in the moment. And that's where it's the only place anything ever happens. It's literally true that your entire past is over, really gone. This is all you've got. And if you find out that you've got 10 minutes to live, then you really know the truth of that. It's always true. So whatever this is right now, and the this is what's happening in the immediate scene, but it's also what's going on inside you. Your feelings, your body, your thoughts. That whole thing is what must have attention, because it's all there is. And then you say, well, but I don't really like the present moment very much, or I don't, when you look inside, you might not like what you see. And so the tendency, especially if you've been wishing to do better or wake up, or just be present once in a while, the tendency is to look away from whatever's going on in there, right? If you don't like, if you can see that the feelings you're feeling are causing you pain, or the thoughts you're thinking are keeping you in a tight little circle, you don't want to be with that. You want to have something better, some better internal situation. And very often it looks like the way to get that is to get better outer circumstances, or avoid whatever's going on right now, or somehow mentally manage whatever's going on right now. Meanwhile, any attempt to escape or resist what's actually really happening, outside your field of awareness or inside, that's all that's real. And that's where, you can see, and it's the only place you can see, what it is that you do to keep yourself from knowing what you really deeply are. There's a reason we don't always sense this incredible, peaceful, free space that we're made of. And the reason is that we make so much racket, commotion, with all the mental stuff. So, and all that stuff happens in the present, right? I mean, no thought can cause you pain unless you're having it right now. So, there's a pattern. We all have these patterns, these things we habitually think, these ways we habitually react, these unresolved issues that keep coming up and up and up. The only way it's ever going to be possible for that to change, and it really can change, but the only way it's possible for it to change is if you're willing to turn the light of awareness on your interior as it's functioning right now. But here's the thing. It's not to judge it. All our lives, we're made to, feel guilty, feel embarrassed, feel ashamed, look inside ourselves, not like what we see, and either avoid it, or make excuses for it, or decide we're going to do better, or congratulate ourselves if we think we are doing better. That whole thing is useless. So what I'm suggesting when I say bring the light of awareness to your interior has nothing to do with any of that. All that is why we're all exhausted, okay? And we think, something in us thinks, if we can fix all that, somehow we're going to get free of it. It's madness. It'll just keep it going. So this isn't about finding a way to feel better about yourself at all. Because that in us that's already free couldn't care less about any of it. Doesn't take it seriously. So when we take it seriously, it's like shoveling coal into the hopper, into the fire. So when you think about yourself, or when you every self-help book or method that's ever been thought up is aimed at fixing the ego. Okay? This is a whole other thing. It's like there's two of us, and I hesitate to say this because it's not like actually two entities in the body, but actually, as it is experienced for all practical purposes, there are in each of us two kind of self-awareness mechanisms. There's the there's the ego one, the mental one, that's all into improvement and healing and forgiveness and achieving and all of that stuff. It's all of the ego. Then there's this other that's just light. When light comes on in a room, it doesn't care what it illumines, right? I mean, it's absolutely neutral, like space. Space doesn't have an opinion about what happens in it. It's just there. It's generous. As in, it'll hold anything. Something in us is like that. So in a moment of real self-awareness, the kind that's actually transformative, it's like the light came on. There's no discomfort. There's no judgment. There's no wish to even change anything. So you see, when you feel that happening, that other kind of stuff happening, where you don't like what you see, you feel guilty, you want to turn away from it, you want to make up a story about how it's okay or how you got to be that way. You know, it's like a buzzer should go off in your mind as you realize that's just the ego talking to itself. When this other awareness comes, you're absolutely at rest. It's like a scientist turning on a light and looking. Not so you feel bad about yourself, not even so you figure out how to change, but so you'll see that it's an invented thing. That's all. Because if we didn't believe that we are our conditioned, identified selves, if we didn't believe that that's who we really are, we'd walk around all the time in absolute restful joyfulness. The reason we don't, the only reason we don't, is that we've got ourselves convinced that our thoughts are true, that I am my value system, I am the things I do, I am my looks, I am the roles I play, I am my history, I am my dreams. And for all of that, we don't sense the deep, absolute ease that we really are. So the reason that it's so valuable to bring awareness to the present expression of whoever I am, however I'm sort of showing up as an apparent person right now, inner and outer, but especially inner. It's so useful because then I can see, oh, this is how I keep myself going. This is how that person keeps believing in herself. And that's all you have to do. It's so restful. You're just looking, just observing, not making any commitment to do better, to be different. You don't have to make up a whole theory about it. You know, the less you can go into your mind, up into your head, analytically or, using any kind of language, the better able you'll be to really see what it's worth, what it's useful to see. And the rest isn't up to you. But, you don't, it's so much, in a way, simpler than we can stand to think it is. But what happens is, when you, and of course we're not always going to notice. Most of the time we don't. Most of the time we're absolutely unconscious, right? But then for whatever reason you do notice what's going on, like you notice all of a sudden how obsessively you're thinking about something, over and over and over the same thing, and how, if you look, you'll see, if you have painful emotions, if you look to see, there are thoughts behind those emotions. And if you hadn't told yourself those thoughts, you wouldn't be feeling the way you do. So sometimes just to observe the causal relationship there, you go back and look at the thoughts. It's not that you're trying to stop the thoughts. This is so, people get so exhausted from, like they'll sit to meditate and they'll say, I can't quiet my mind. Don't try to quiet your mind, it's a waste of time. But you don't need to. All you need to do is see that your thoughts are made up. They're objects. Because as soon as I, like if I'm doing that obsessive thinking about something, as soon as I observe it, phenomenon, observe it, something in me, the one that's looking, isn't caught up in it. It's that light, the light that came on. So when you get in an uproar about whatever the thoughts are, or trying to do something about the emotions, you're taking it all seriously. Meanwhile, the one that can look at the whole thing doesn't take it seriously at all. Now, why does this change us? But it does. It does. Something in us already knows the truth. Something in us knows that thoughts are all made up. Something in us deeply wants to be done with the whole painful charade. It recognizes the truth when it sees it. So if you bring a little bit of self-awareness, consciousness to the moment, and just see what's functioning without trying to change it or judge it at all, just see it. Something in you will recognize, whether or not you're consciously thinking this, doesn't matter, but something in you will recognize that the thoughts are invented and that they have everything to do with why you suffer. Whereas normally we tell ourselves, I'm suffering because X, Y, and Z has happened in my life, or, something's going to hell with the world, or that's why I'm suffering. I'm suffering because I have a sickness, or, But when you look, when you just kind of watch what's going on in your mind, in your awareness, very often you'll see that you're suffering because of something going on in your mind. And that's all you have to do is see it. The next thing you know, some other moments come and you're conscious or you're not. You might still be aware. You might get drawn right back into the mess of it. It's okay. We'll go in and out of it. But at some point, something will happen in your life and you won't react, or not as much, or not as automatically. And you'll notice it and you'll go, oh my God, look at that. And you didn't make that happen by trying to make it different. It happened because some earlier time you observed yourself in reactivity, or you observed yourself resisting something. And all you did was see it. Something in you registered, that's an option. Something in us, when you look, even though you may not be consciously thinking this, something in you gets that choice has been operating where you didn't realize it was. And it's very much in the background of awareness. But then, some future time, a different kind of choice will express itself, and you'll notice it, and you'll go, look at that. You can feel that you've changed. But not because you tried to change yourself. It happens because you were willing to look at yourself as you actually are, without judging. So if you're doing this kind of observing, and you feel guilty or anxious about what you're seeing, just back up a little bit more. Get a little more space in the picture, because the thing that's feeling judgmental is not the higher awareness, but it's always available to you. Always. And the thing about present moment awareness, whether your primary attention is on what's happening around you or on your interior, it's wonderful if there can always be at least a little bit on your interior. But when that's where your attention is, you'll notice the feeling, the visceral feeling, is of space, not of time. Things get very still. When your attention is purely on something, and you might have experienced this in a shocking situation, like a terrible accident, or you just got really awful news, a phone call or something. Or maybe something of extraordinary beauty that you're looking at, or you're doing some creative act, and when your awareness if you kind of if it dawns on you to notice how you're feeling, there's a profound stillness. And, what we say is time stopped. I felt time stopped. But really, what you're getting there, time never was moving. It seems to because of our minds. We look for one thing after another, and story and all of that, and memory seems to be that way. But as you actually experience the moment, it's like space. It's still. You're here. Do you know what I mean? We don't normally experience it that way because our minds are so busy. And the mind creates this feeling of movement. Usually it's this kind of movement, or linear. But as we actually experience life, it's still. So presence, when you're really present with the moment, it's got the quality of space, not of. I used to think the now, the present moment was where the past and the future bumped up against each other, and then there was this one little kind of thing where they touch. It's not even on the timeline. That whole past and future thing is only in the mind. As you actually live your life, you don't experience the future. You don't experience the past. You cannot experience anything but this moment. If you couldn't think, if you had no memory, and you couldn't anticipate, you would not experience time. You know what I mean? And, so life is busy, and people have a tendency to multitask. It almost looks like you have to multitask. If you don't, you'd never get everything done, all that, right? It seems, how could it be, with so much to do, always, how could it be that each moment is still? Oh. If all that's happening, if all you're giving attention to is what you're doing right now, or even what you're thinking about right now, if thinking is necessary, which it often is. Thinking can be very useful. Learning what it feels like when the mind is rightly used is quite and we all know what that feels like. It's not pain-inducing. It's productive. It solves problems. It learns. But if all you're giving attention to is what you're doing right now, and you really can only do one thing at a time. I was the queen of multitasking, and I didn't do any of it very well. If you really only do one thing at a time, you can be absolutely still while you're doing it. Eckhart Tolle says this wonderful thing about how you can be running through an airport to get to a plane you're about to miss. And you can be absolutely still inside, even though your body's going at top speed. You can be absolutely calm inside. So don't ever tell yourself, I have too much to do to be still in the moment. Oh, you're doing a terrible number on yourself. It's not about getting your life to quiet down. Now, it's not that, most of us could stand to let our lives quiet down a little bit, but there's not a one-to-one correspondence between how much there is to do and what the inner state is like. It's all about attention. That's the whole thing. If you're not anticipating constantly, what's the next thing? Or I've got to hurry up and get this done so I can move on to that. If you stop doing that, it makes such a difference in how you actually experience the moment. All of that stuff is about anxiety. We tell ourselves it's necessary to anticipate or to do two things at once. But, something in us thinks, it's madness if you really look at what's going on. Something in us thinks, if I don't anticipate the next thing coming, somehow it won't happen, or I'll forget that it needs to be done or something. You know, really, if you look at what underlies an awful lot of what causes us to be anxious and stressed, it's really, if you look at it, and here's where the mind can be very helpful, it's insane. We don't actually have to do that. And I know that was exactly me to a T. That's how my life was, that whole thing. I was productive, I was on the ball, you know, I always really wanted to do a good job at everything I did. People depended on me because I, you know, blah, 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 blah. And something in me was constantly anxious and stressed. Something in me said, I have to be, in effect, doing it all at once, or doing the next 3 or 4 things while I'm doing this one. Because, you know, there's fear. We think, oh, if I don't do it right, or if I don't get everything done, or people are depending on me. It's about fear. It's not about that we actually have to be anticipating, or, you know. If you watch what goes on in your awareness while you're feeling really busy, rushed, stressed, just kind of notice that, you know, how many things am I doing here right now? Just do one. Just one. Then do the next thing. And you can be absolutely at rest inside at each step along the way. And then by the time you get to the end, if you do get to the end of it, you haven't worn yourself out. You don't need to take a break because you haven't exhausted yourself. We think we need less to do in order to not be exhausted or to not be stressed. There's no such thing as getting the list small enough. You know, you'd be anxious anyway. You'd be stressed anyway. That tells us something. Yeah. We don't have to do that. We actually don't have to do it. And the whole thing is about being willing to just be self-aware. Whenever it comes to you to do it. Often you won't. Often you're so caught up in what's going on, but then when the light comes on, suddenly you kind of notice, oh, don't beat yourself up for all those previous moments. They're gone. They're gone, gone, gone. And if you have a particularly self-aware day where, you know, there's a lot of illumination going on and you have a lot of insights and feel like, oh, now I see what I do, now I see what I do. Don't tell yourself, I'm going to do this tomorrow too. You know, it's all over again, only right now. It's the only time anything happens. And it doesn't matter what's happening out there, what you're doing. It's only by being present with it, which means aware and absolutely unresisting. Absolutely unresisting. It's only by that there's some hope of the door opening to you feeling what you really deeply are. And that's why you're all here. That's what people want. Well, you don't get that. It's not like you get there in spite of life. Life, you know, the actual moment-to-moment life is the door. It is how we show up for ourselves. It is how we taste what's deeply in there. And, you know, we're not in control of what life brings. You know? We're just going along for the ride, right? I mean, when you notice yourself disliking what's happening, realize there's an underlying assumption running. It's like one of those programs on the computer that's running but you don't know it's running. There's an underlying assumption that runs through our entire lives that things have to be a certain way out there in our circumstances, in our environment. Things have to be a certain way for us to be okay inside. That assumption is deadly. And when you So when you feel yourself discontent or in resistance or complaining, notice, look at what's happening there. We want to feel good, right? That's the whole thing. We want to feel good. We want to feel content and at peace and, whatever your words are that you would use for yourself. That's the motive that runs everything. If the assumption is, I can't be okay, happy, peaceful, etc., unless the outer things are a certain way, that's an absolute setup for lifelong suffering. So if it's going on, if that assumption is running your life, and it almost certainly is, a good part of the time anyway, just see that it's there. Normally what we do when something happens that we don't like, or that we're sad about, or it's scary or something, our response to that, where our attention goes, is to try to manage the thing, fix it, escape it, or tell ourselves a story about it to somehow make it okay. If instead the attention would go to that underlying assumption that this thing is out there is responsible for my degree of peace and well-being, that's a really useful place to look. And of course, to the extent that we push against anything that's real, that's absolutely causing us to suffer. I mean, if you're aware of that in yourself, if you've watched it happen, how pushing against something makes it worse for you, if you've seen that happen and you still let it happen, you should really notice that. We look away from a lot that we know better. Because the ego, of course, doesn't know better about anything, or it will think it does, or tell itself, yeah, I know I need to stop that, blah, blah, blah. But deeply, deeply, there are many, many things we know better than, and we still go ahead and do them. It's only from this higher awareness that you can really watch that whole thing without squirming about it, and really kind of observe how choice is operating. When resistance is in the picture, we choose to resist. It happens automatically. It happens really fast, and it's not like we have a conscious moment of choice to resist. But when you as soon as you become aware, resistance hurts. So often, the sort of sign that I'm denying reality here is that there's some kind of discomfort in me, or some kind of noisy thing coming out of my mouth, complaining, or going, now what, or looking for somebody else to share my complaint with or something. So when there's that kind of uncomfortable or negative something going on, just kind of stop for a second and look at it and realize that somewhere back there, below the level of conscious awareness, you chose to... What is resistance? When you resist something that's real, you're trying to change something that has already happened, right? You're saying, this shouldn't be, or I don't like that. This is different from accepting what's happened and saying, now I'm going to try to improve things. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the initial take on the thing that's happened that you don't like. So if you just look at it, look at that, when it happens, when you're in resistance, and we all do it, like if you watch yourself really with a really neutral awareness all day long, and if you could stay aware literally all day, and you wrote down every single time you resisted, even a little tiny thing, you'd be shocked how many times it happens. So if you see this and you realize how anytime you resist a fact, it only makes it worse. If you just did that one thing for yourself, just that one thing, learn to become really aware when there's any resistance and stop. The amount of peace and well-being that you bring into your life by that one change would be profound. And we are in such resistance against this idea. It's un-American to surrender, right? I mean, Or it looks like approval. Something in us says, if I completely accept something I don't like, it's tantamount to approving of it. No. No. Something in us wants to be sane. Deeply, deeply wants to be sane. It's sane to say, yes, this thing is real. And you know that if you want to feel peaceful in your life, just that one thing, just if you get to where it's automatic to say yes to a fact, automatic, you'll be at peace no matter what's going on. We think the absence of peacefulness is because there's chaos and bad stuff happens and all of that. The absence of peacefulness comes of fighting reality. So what an amazing, it's so, we're used to thinking that peace comes of arranging things in a certain way, that my life will be calm, or that I'll have the important things provided for, or that there won't be poverty, there won't be war in the larger world. We're used to thinking it's a circumstantial thing, but nothing is circumstantial. The actual experience of life is only momentary. What looks like a circumstantial something is something that exists in the mind. So your actual, when I say nothing is circumstantial, I mean none of your actual experience of life occurs circumstantially. It's all momentary. If you want to feel peaceful, stop trying so hard to manage all the outer stuff as if that's going to do it. I mean, you know what it's like to be in a peaceful environment and to be absolutely not at peace, right? And you may also know what it's like to be in a city, in a war zone, where there's an awful lot of activity and it's not safe and there's crime around, and you're absolutely at peace. So we have a huge amount of say in how life feels to us. Much more than we're normally ready to allow ourselves to know. And it's ironically not about control. It's not about trying hard. It's exactly the opposite of most of what we do to try to make things better for ourselves. It's about yielding. It's about allowing. It's about just looking. It's about feeling. Actually feeling. And I'm distinguishing between feeling and emotion. When you're really in the present, which means when you're really aware of what's happening in the immediate, including aware of your interior, when something happens, good or bad, neutral, something happens that you're there for, you're engaged with it, there's often some subtle or not so subtle spontaneous feeling in response. It's a body thing. It's an animal thing almost. Just momentary, spontaneous. This is before the mind gets in on it. So if that spontaneous feeling is something we don't want to feel, then the mind gets busy defending or making up some protective device. And that's what generates emotion. And the emotional stuff is what Eckhart says ends up in a pain body. We don't suffer because of feeling, that very spontaneous thing. Sometimes we'll feel pain, but the mental kind of suffering that is a burden that we carry forever, the things we don't recover from readily, the things that cause us to react, the issues that we have, the ways that we're afraid, all of that is from mentally produced emotion in response to some original feeling that we didn't want to feel. Usually. That is the case. People tend to roll all of that into a ball. They think, it's a good thing to be emotional versus in your head, or they think, there are good emotions and there are bad emotions. or they think there's something about being heartfelt that's related to being emotional. But if you make the distinction between the emotion that gets created by thoughts, reactive thoughts, make a distinction between those and the very early primary response that you have, the spontaneous response you have to a situation, before the mind ever gets in on it. If you stay with the feeling, instead of escaping into your head, even if it hurts, you just allow yourself to feel it. Oh, okay. And don't resist at all. It's really key. Then the next thing you know, the feeling has spent itself. And then the next moment comes. And you don't have residue from that one before. But this takes a kind of courage. You have to be willing to be in your life. And your life only means this moment. It's really a momentary thing. So feel it. So what happens? I want to give you an example of the kind of thing we do. If you're driving along on 128 and you look in the rearview mirror and there's a semi so close behind you you can't see its lights, what's the very first thing you feel? Pissed off.
Fear.
Fear. Yes. Yes. It's fear. You danger. My God. It's like I could die. But immediately it turns to pissed off. You're flipping the guy off. Or you're, what do? You say, how dare he? Doesn't he know he could kill somebody? Or, you put your foot on the brake while you've got your other foot on the gas, or scare him. We don't want to stay with the fear. So the mind, we want to protect ourselves, right? We do, that's a really, spontaneous kind of ordinary thing that doesn't have long-term ramifications. But if somebody hurts your feelings, somebody, whatever, make up your own story, we've all got them. Somebody hurts your feelings. You don't want to stay with it, right? Very quickly it becomes righteous indignation, or he's a jerk anyway, or something. That's what causes the suffering. The suffering is not caused by the fact that somebody hurt your feelings. It's caused by your unwillingness to just let yourself feel hurt. Okay. It bites. Of course it's going to bite. Sometimes life is painful. But that little bit of pain that's authentic, it's how you know you're alive. It's neither good nor bad, it's just a fact. That little bit of pain is what your engagement with the present moment of life is. Just feel it. If you can manage not to go up into your head with all the defense mechanisms that we've learned, our parents taught us early to have those defense mechanisms. Our friends taught us, we've all got them built in, and they happen so automatically, they kick in. We don't even see it's all operating, and the next thing you know, you're pissed, or whatever, all the emotional thing. If you see yourself caught up in that, just stop. God, it's got such a momentum of its own. But as soon as you see it's happening, just give yourself a second to breathe, and then go back, rewind, go back to before the uproar, before the defensive thought. What was the precipitating thing? What was it, and what was the very first feeling? Go back and give it its due. It's real. If you don't, it's not like it's not still in you. It's like now it's like a little tumor growing, and we're all loaded with these things. But we don't have to be. So when something happens like that hurts, let it hurt. Just let it hurt. Let it be itself. Let your response to it be itself. Okay. And then you move on. And if you look a few minutes later, you realize you're over it. You're not burdened by it anymore. And most of the stuff that we're hauling around that makes us afraid of getting involved in a relationship, or afraid of taking a risk, or afraid of death, or most of that stuff comes of some feeling way back there that we didn't allow to have its due. So you don't have to keep doing it. That's one of the things about awareness in the moment. when you let yourself watch this stuff happening in actual moment, present moment life, you see what you're doing, and you realize, oh, gosh, maybe I don't have to do this. Maybe I can go back and go sit down somewhere and cry for a minute. Or, feel brokenhearted. Whatever it is. Let it be what it's going to be. And then, Eckhart has this wonderful image of ducks where, I don't know, they get into a fight or something, or one of them gets in the other one's way and they go, wah, 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 wah. And as they move apart from each other, they kind of shake their feathers and then they go on. So shake your feathers. That's what that is. It's like, okay, let the thing, that's how we're alive. We are feeling creatures. We know that we've been affected by something, and it's just part of life. And if we don't feel it, then we're burdened with another sin we don't have to be burdened with. Anyway, I've been talking a really long time. I'm going to stop talking for a little. And we'll, in a few minutes, we'll take a break and get a stretch and go to the bathroom. So, but would anybody like to say anything? Anybody besides me? Yeah.
Well, you don't have to answer if you don't want.
Okay.
You don't want to talk. But so as I'm evolving and I see that all the things that I thought would bring me happiness won't, then why do them? So it's like, why do? And it could be in the most basic level of, why cook, or on a much bigger level, why do the work that I'm doing, or, I can take other examples.
It's a great thing to ask yourself. The reason we do things is something that's very much an evolution as this stuff, as awakening happens little by little. So things come to be done for themselves. Oh, cook food because you're hungry, not because it's going to make your day. Do work in the world because it needs to be done, or because you need the income, not because it'll make you feel good about yourself. I mean, one of the discoveries is why you've been doing things, and then what are the reasons? I mean, it's a wonderful question that gets asked by a person who's feeling this stuff shift. And one thing that happens is you find you don't need to do a lot of things you thought you did. Because it turns out the only reason you were doing them was so you'd feel good about yourself. But there are legitimate reasons to do things.
Yeah, I'm getting stuck somewhere in this. That, I don't know if I'm like veering off into cynicism or if I'm giving up in a not good way.
If you look at when you do something and it goes well, what is the feeling about that? What is it? What does it feel like? Or if it doesn't go well, what is the feeling? That's the kind of thing that goes away.
Mm-hmm.
So when that isn't there anymore, like if it doesn't go well, it doesn't really affect you, then you have to ask, well, is it worth doing anyway?
Yeah,
And often it is.
Like, where's the meaning in life with that,
Yes. Oh, yes, it's great. Life, we're used to life having to have meaning in the way that we normally define it, according to what we do and how things go and all of that. When you stop defining yourself by what you do, you find that life doesn't particularly have meaning in the way you're used to it having meaning. But also the need for it to have meaning is gone. When you don't have to do something outer to deeply satisfy what's in here, but it's its own, what's in here is its own fulfillment, joy, whatever. life doesn't have to mean anything anymore. But you can't talk yourself into that. It's a gradually unfolding discovery as you notice, I'm doing this thing here to make myself feel good, and it's devastating when it doesn't go well. When you notice that kind of thing and you say, oh, so that's how I keep it's one of the things I do to keep my familiar self going and feeling like that's who I really am. You know, when you just see it, how much it matters, how much it does have meaning. Little by little, it begins to shift. And you begin to say, do I really still want to do this or don't I? And things do change. They do.
So are you giving up motivation in a way?
The familiar motivation goes.
Yeah.
But there are new motives. Do the thing because it needs doing, because it will help somebody, because it's fun, because someone else asked you to. Something in us thinks, if I don't have the old familiar motives, civilization will fall apart. Like, why would we bother with an awful lot? Why don't we take a break? I think I'm seeing the handwriting on the wall. So why don't we just take 10 minutes if you need to stretch or go to the bathroom or get water.